Perfect. So, Adam, let's start with permaculture.
Sure.
Awesome. So, what is permaculture?
Permaculture stands for something called permanent agriculture.
Wow.
So essentially getting your food, fabric, fibers, and all that locally sourced so that you're not transporting it from thousands of miles away, let's say. Yeah.
So it's a normal agriculture, or?
Well, it's working with nature versus against nature is the easiest way, I say, of describing it. But obviously, once you start observing how nature works together, it becomes far more complicated. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but no, it's something I only recently came into, maybe a couple of years ago. I have a steak business, and my first business partner was from Austria. So he introduced me to the concept originally, showed me some crazy, wacky old farmer films on YouTube. At first, I didn't know what to think. And then the more I looked at it, I said, hey, this is the first solution I've come across in my life that has no negative downsides to it. And I've seen a lot of stuff, but this was the first thing where I literally couldn't find anything negative about it. So, and then you realize that essentially the world that we live in nowadays, we have so many problems. And it's really come out, especially with coronavirus. You see all the cracks in society, the breakdown of people psychologically, the whole logistics systems, toilet paper shortages. But and then all of a sudden you realize that the answer is in front of us the whole time. Yeah, there's.
So what is perma?
Well, perma meaning permanent. Yeah, which I would say there's a better way to describe it. They now call it regenerative agriculture, which the regenerative is important because what you start to understand is that essentially the way that conventional agriculture works, we're like the UK now, they say they have about 50 or 60 harvests left before they run out of topsoil. And actually the number one export in the United States right now is topsoil. So there's only 3 places in nature where topsoil naturally regenerates itself. So it's the bottom of large bodies of water, in forests, and on natural prairie, where essentially you have herds roaming around. Yeah. And now the problem is that the way that conventional agriculture works is that we're basically depleting the topsoil, leaving it barren, and then it just gets wiped away by flash floods because you have overcompacted ground, for example. Yeah.
Wow.
So with regenerative agriculture, what you're really doing is the first thing is because to be a good farmer, ask a farmer, what makes a good farmer? Yeah.
Yeah.
And some people might tell you, oh, well, it's, the inputs you might put into it, or it's the stock you have or whatever. No, it's your soil. Yeah. It's as simple as that. If you have good soil, you can grow anything with sunlight and water, of course. Yeah. Yeah. So when you get down to it, when you do the regenerative, that's really about rebuilding your soil so that you can plant those things. And yeah, and there's obviously a lot more components to it, but that regenerative part. And I also do like the fact that it signifies regenerating not just agriculture, but also society, communities, and that stuff as well. Yeah.
Cool. How old is it?
Ooh, well, this is the question. The term was actually coined permaculture in the 1970s. However, and then there's also another, because the book I have was written by a guy called Bill Mollison. He's from Australia. And so he kind of put these ideas together throughout his life. They wrote a couple books, and then in the 70s, and then in the 80s, they finalized. 70s at first. And he coined the term, but actually there's another guy called Sepp Holzer in Austria, who he practiced the same techniques. He just didn't really coin the name for it, essentially. Yeah. So.
Wow.
So if you really want to get how old it is, it's however old agriculture is.
Wow.
Yeah. And the way that we used to do things, the way for the past 12,000 years that we've been essentially working with nature to kind of regenerate our soil. You basically take the animal manure, you put it back into the field, fertilize everything, and then repeat that cycle essentially. Yeah.
So how do people get into permaculture?
Well, obviously what's happened we talk about, like, it's very strange because as human society, we're very forgetful of how things used to be. Yeah. And what people think is normal now has only been normal for the past, call it 60, 70 years or so. Yeah, the advent of modern conventional agriculture and industrialized agriculture, all the rest of it. But really, the way that we used to do things, it really all changed when energy became cheap. And there's a really good book I read called The End of Food.
End of Food.
End of Food. I forgot who the author was, but it was really well done. But essentially what it is, it describes how we went
Paul
from
Roberts?
Paul Roberts, correct. So that describes how we went from World War II, 1950s. All these guys had all these chemicals left over from making bombs, nitrate, which then they're like, what are we going to do with this stuff?
Yeah.
Well, we'll use it for the fertilizer. Then you have the Marshall Plan, right? So they're rebuilding Europe. And so in order to get the funds, there were some, let's call it caveats with that, yeah? And one of them was what led to export-driven subsidies. So to go large scale, to produce a lot all at once, put all that fertilizer into the ground, see the stuff grow up over one season very fast with only annual crops, take it, export it, yeah? Now the problem is if you keep doing that over time, you'd start depleting the soil. You have to put more fertilizer into the ground. That doesn't necessarily always get absorbed. And to maintain those high yields that they want, it's, what is it better to be? Is it better to be efficient or is it better to be effective? Yeah. So me as a permaculture designer, I don't care if this farmer next to me is going to get 30% more yield than I do. Even if I get, let's say, 30% less than him, if my soil is rebuilding over time, then over time that will be more effective, essentially. Yeah.
How technological is permaculture?
Well, here's the interesting part: is where we're at right now is in society, and even in this book, it's written as well. It says that basically there was a stagnation in the 1960s. Yeah. So we're talking like this is basically when my father grew up, essentially. Yeah. And since then, we've not really progressed except in a couple of ways. One, obviously, being the internet, but really in terms of like innovative or let's call it revolutionary, we haven't really progressed all that much. But all the solutions currently exist that we need to solve these problems. So with permaculture, what it says is the use of technology is encouraged, but it has to be appropriate use of technology. Yeah. And another concept that I always like to discuss with people as well is like, what is sustainable? You hear all this greenwashing, all this stuff.
What is sustainable?
What is sustainable? What to you is sustainable? That's a question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of, most corporations have sustainability guidelines and a lot of other things. But when you really deep down look at it, it's more a marketing budget and a marketing idea than anything else. Yeah. One of my favorite part of this sustainability is when you see that there are this like a different recycle bins or let's just say, like different baskets, but by the end of the day, you see to just add all of them into one place and just throw it out.
Polish recycling. Yeah.
I mean, so literally that's where we really don't even understand, like, are you really just doing it for your own conscience or you're really trying to be, like good for the environment?
Well, good old greenwashing as they call it. Yeah.
Or you try to get this like impossible burger and then you try to take a look at nutritions in it. And I was like, what am I doing? Yeah. Like, am I just trying to not to kill animals, or am I really trying to add some extra nutritions to my body?
Yeah. Well, so getting back to like sustainability.
Yeah.
So, and I asked that question to many people, and no one can give me a straight answer.
I really don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
So, what is sustainable? Sustainable is something that you get more out of it over its lifetime than the energy you put into it. Okay. So like, that includes like, the technology, the building of it, the maintenance over its lifetime, and then recycling it afterwards. Yeah. Now, what's interesting as well is that, everyone's all for being sustainable. So everyone's like, oh, let's do solar panels. Let's do windmills. Yeah. But actually from an engineering perspective, and you might know this, is that the amount of energy it takes to make those things, they do not recoup the energy over its lifetime afterwards. Yeah. Yeah. So those actually technologies are not really sustainable. And of course, people can argue, oh, the technology will get better and all the rest of it. But the real definition of sustainability, again, is the appropriate use of technology and making sure that that thing is more useful than the effort you put into it, right? So, so with the technology aspect, and like I said, all the solutions exist right now. So I can give you some examples of some of the things like we're working on, because permaculture is not just about farming. It's actually it's a way of thinking about design. Yeah. I'll give you like a really short example. And this is why I loved coming across this book, because it totally changes your view of things.
Yeah.
So I was in Sweden a couple of weeks ago. There's a permaculture designer there. So this guy had a chimney in his roof that was leaking, right? Oh, what would a person do? They'd call the guy, it'd come over, it'd cost you a couple, I don't know, $1,000 to go and fix your roof, find the hole and all the rest of this. What does this guy do? He put a greenhouse on his roof. Okay. And think about that, because you have the greenhouse, sunlight's coming in, it's warming the house, right? Solves the leak. And also the chimney that goes through is also heating the greenhouse. Yeah. So, and again, that's stacking functions, right? So that's another concept we have in permaculture. So you're stacking functions and appropriate use of technology, right? But again, the outside thinking of the box, yeah? And what's interesting now is that, like I said, there's all these solutions exist. So, but to create a sustainable society, it requires many different components, yeah? Like how do you do your housing, your energy production, water? Water's quite easy, to be honest. We'll talk about that in a bit, the water crisis and everything. And also, yeah, food, fiber, fabrics, all the needs that you need to create like a sustainable community, let's call it, yeah. And really what needs to be done is all the solutions currently exist, but they need to be applied and put together, yeah. And there's also like there's a problem with current society as well, as when you think about universities, they don't function very well anymore, because you have these silos, right? You have chemistry, physics, and they're all siloed out from each other, and then they're all competing for grants. They're all competing against one another, which what they should be doing is they should be cooperating with one another, and they'll get a lot more done. Yeah. And a great example of this was like in London, they built this new science center there where they actually combined the chemistry, physics, and biology departments all together, so these people could finally collaborate. Yeah.
Interdisciplinary.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
How many kids grow up to be a farmer?
Not many anymore. Yeah.
How many kids grow up to be a farmer who also really need to understand innovation, technology, and everything around it?
Yeah. Well, this is the interesting thing, is like I originally come from, I'm a city boy. Yeah. I grew up in California.
Yeah.
I lived in multiple places all around the world, and then one day I just decided to become a farmer. But the interesting part is, because of all my past experience in entrepreneurship, starting different IT companies, working in high frequency trading, this kind of stuff, I have all these disciplines that go into being a farmer. Because the way that people think about farming now is, you go to the university, you get your degree, you put the seeds in this time, you put in your treatments, your inputs, all the rest of that, you harvest, you sell to some big company, yeah? But a real farmer is just about, he's a real entrepreneur. He's everything. He has to manage the farm. He has to manage the finances. He has to do the marketing. He has to, sell to customers. Yeah. So what I'm really excited about right now is basically helping current farmers change their ways, but also teaching them how to do the marketing, set up an e-commerce store, target people, go direct to customers. Because what's happening right now is that the big companies, they basically take out 90% of that margin in between the farmer and the end client. And that really doesn't, and you have farmers losing money and living on EU subsidies, yeah, or subsidies in general, yeah, and they're not profitable anymore. So if you're able to and this is what I'm trying to work on right now, is the ideal vision for permaculture. It's stated that what you're looking for a mosaic of small bioregions. Yeah, so basically you have villages and towns that are pretty self-sufficient. They can trade between one another. And then between bioregions, you can do some trading. For example, I have some farms down in the south of Italy. So I would bring olive oil up to Poland. And then from Poland, you could bring pickles down to Italy, right? Because I'm a good pickles, right? And going back to
that's again sustainability.
It is, but again, it's appropriate use. Yeah. So obviously, in an ideal world, you wouldn't do that. But one thing is, I'm a very practical person. And if we're going to change the way that we're doing things, we still have to integrate with society. there will still be things that people will do even if you educate them for 20 or 30 years, like smoking or these other things that you just, it'll take a long time to stamp out of society, essentially. Yeah. So
How do you think this coronavirus that allow people to learn how to make sourdough and grow some stuff in their balcony, somehow try to bring them a bit further and then try to see if they can also try to go into some level of agriculture? I mean, is it the right way when you grow vegetables in your backyard to just call it an agriculture, or we're just pushing it too far?
yeah, no, I think everything, if you really think about it, all the world's problems can be solved in your garden. Yeah. Because what have we created? We live in a city where our lifestyles are supported by a whole logistical chain going all the way down to some third world country where some guy's cutting down the trees so he can grow the soybeans to basically put to your food, essentially. Yeah. So by shortening that chain, that just makes a very more efficient and also the quality of your food. I mean, one of the problems I have now is I can't go into new restaurants anymore. I'm so used to farm food, and it's interesting because I've been in Poland since 1998. Yeah, like when I was a kid, and the quality of food from that point up until now, just the Western ways got into the market, and now everything's so overprocessed. And if you've ever had like an egg from a farm or an egg from the store, it's two completely different products, and just in terms of nutrition as well. Yeah, it's yeah, and they've created these huge industries that really, at the end of the day, are not needed. I mean, and of course, there are different situations for different people, right? I mean, if you're living out in the the countryside, obviously you have a field, you can do some large scale stuff. If you're living in a small apartment, okay, maybe there's not the possibility to grow things, but go find a community garden or like get something together, or do a farm link, right? So basically, you do find a place outside of the city, you get a group of people, you go out and visit every once in a while, and you kind of build that relationship with nature again. Yeah.
Do you think the reason that those eggs are better is because they are quote unquote like bio, or?
Yeah, well, I'm really weary now because we were talking about greenwashing a bit before. Yeah. And, Sweden was a great example because you go like, not every time I go to a country, I don't look at the usual things that people look at. I go to the supermarkets. I take pictures of people's shopping baskets. I go through all the aisles. I was doing this last year. I went to 8 different countries. I was in Costa Rica, Italy, all these places taking pictures. But then I realized when I was doing that is like all these Western countries, no one like grows their food locally anymore. Even on farms, people go to the store, they buy their food there. Yeah. Even in Costa Rica, in all these countries, right? And it's usually, of course, there's some local variations to that, but it's the same lifestyle that basically people have become out of touch with nature. They really don't know how to grow anything, and they all go to the store to get their needs, and they're completely dependent on that. And we're talking about coronavirus before, and I think there is a moment right now that we have and still have where it's a catalyst, and you can sort of see that people, now that they've been able to take a step back, take a couple months off, because most people, I'm not the typical person, I've been an entrepreneur for 9 years or something like that. I'm not afraid of change. Like I've been through 3 bankruptcies and, tons of failure and also ups and downs. But for most people is that their worries about their job, their mortgage, their kids, and that's it, right? But when you have this pause, and basically they're in fight or flight mode, right? So basically their job is their main concern. If they get fired, they're panicking, and there's never a time to sit back, ponder about life, what is important to them, and maybe the things that they should rearrange their priorities essentially to be happier, yeah? And so I think Corona's provided an excellent chance for people to kind of sit back and reflect on those things. And I do love the fact that people are, baking bread, making their own food, and spending time with themselves versus on their phone or electronics. I mean, like the 2 worst things that happened to human society in the past 100 years has basically been cell phones and modern architecture. Yeah. Buildings nowadays are not healthy for people. Like really.
Why not? What's wrong with the buildings?
Well, first of all, the fact that we got into cheap energy is a huge problem, because like now, like if you're in a northern climate, for example, right? Like, why do you not point your building in a southern direction, or if you're down in the southern hemisphere, like north, And why do you not point it so that the sun comes in through the front of the building? Yeah. And you put glazing, so you basically get that greenhouse effect, and you have passive heating, this type of stuff. Yeah. The other thing is ventilation. I mean, ventilation is super, super important to have good quality air for people. And it's a bit of a problem in Warsaw, which is why I'm looking to move. But without realizing it, and I've had friends who are doctors down in Krakow, and like, you know, they do autopsies on people, and their lungs are full of just like all this smog and crap that's in the air. And people don't really think about it, but it's that passive chronic, and that's how people get ill. It's like, human beings do well under short, intense periods of stress. Yeah. But people that have chronic stress through work or the buildings that they're in, or lack of sunlight, for example, as you know, coronavirus is another demonstration, get some vitamin D, right? And you'll get past it. But most people, they sit in offices all day, so they're not getting that vitamin D. And, you know, we as human beings, we used to be outside in the daytime, like all day long. Yeah. Like we didn't have artificial lighting. So you'd go outside, you'd get that full day of like sunlight, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of topics, but yeah, the architecture is a really like, because as humans, you know, what we used to do is we used to design kind of nature around us. Yeah. So like in Amazon is a great example, but basically at one point, I think the Amazon supported something like 20 million people or something like that. And if you've ever been there before, you all of a sudden realize that it's a permaculture system, because humans were there before. And the plants that they put into that forest, you can easily survive there. You have like coca trees, coffee, you know, like everything you need to sort of survive. And it's basically a human designed forest. Okay. Yeah. And the wonderful thing is like, sure, we're in this situation right now, but we as humans, as the one species on the planet who's able to have higher level thinking, we are able to design these systems. If we cooperate with one another and help design these systems and the environments and spaces that we live in. And I mean, you look at city planners and now people are more in tune to this as well, but you literally, by designing your surroundings, you're just a healthier person. Yeah. So if that's with natural sunlight coming to the building, like we have like a skylight here, basically a huge roof, that obviously helps. Yeah. But I mean, it's just the neo-brutalist architecture. I'm sorry, like this neo-brutalism to me is like, I can never understand like 20th century architecture. I was like, what were they thinking? You know, I really don't understand. Like, let's make square, as basic as possible, like fundamental. And it's nothing like the buildings we used to have, where you have that sort of human touch, that artistry to it. And yeah, so basically passive cooled places, which is a big thing. So you're heating. Natural sunlight, where you get your water from. And that's another thing, like water. You know, it's like everyone's panicking about, oh, we're having a water crisis, what are we gonna do, all the rest of this. But really, just collect the rainwater from your roof. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You get a filter, sand filter, you like layer it out, you have sand, gravel, sand, all the rest of this. And once it filters through, you basically have clean drinking water. And better than the stuff from the tap, because it still has like actually has the good bacteria and stuff that's in the rain, that's in the clouds, all the rest of it.
But you mentioned the whole smog and everything. Yeah. I mean, talking about California, I mean, the rain that comes out of that weather, are we really talking about drinking that? Because
well, no, but again, you have to be smart about it. Yeah. So you don't drink the pure rainwater, but again, you put in these filters, and also they have something called reed beds as well. So if you really wanted to, in deserts, what they do is all the toilet water and all the runoff from there, that goes into like a gravel bed with reeds in it, and what comes out the other end is clean drinking water. Yeah. Okay. But the concept to most people, they don't think about it that way. Yeah.
I think also active charcoal is one of those things that really do matter.
Active charcoal is a great thing, and also you put some limestone in that tank as well, in your water tank, so it doesn't acidify either, right? So, but these are, and like I said, like there are new solutions that exist that we can use, and there are the old solutions, and the old solutions I do prefer to use a lot of the time, because it doesn't require maintenance or basically you have to pay attention to it all the time, right? It's passive, it works, it uses simple physics, and it just sort of maintains itself. You can use it for 100, 200 years and it'll still work, for example.
There also, you mentioned about walking outside. I mean, talking about sun also in Poland is not always like really like just get out and just get some vitamin D, but there's another whole concept. I'm not really going to say I'm a big fan or something, but to some extent, at least I would say it might be worthy of like putting more thoughts to it. And that's this whole movement called earthing. I don't know if you know about that.
What is explain that?
Earthing.
Earthing.
So it's all about like the fact that we kind of lost touch with the earth. And there's also another whole movement about this whole shoes that are not that much in like changing the way that we walk. And they basically said that the moment that you really walk barefoot, that how much other ways you can basically like heal yourself.
Okay.
I'm too like I don't know how much of that is scientific. But
I've not heard the term earthing before, but I know what you mean. I did read a study recently that basically said people being around trees is healthy for them. Yeah, so there's definitely that. The other fact of the matter is, and actually I'm kind of working on this concept right now. I have a website called greenstitute.com where I put up a couple of videos, how to do permaculture, the rest of this. But what I have right now is I actually have a list of about 40 like leads, farms like this, where we're going to go and renovate these places into regenerative agriculture practices, right? But one of the things I have on the contract is that once we're done, each of those places has to be an education center. Because really the only way that we're going to change, obviously you have to go from the top, but you have to go from the bottom as well. And by turning those into education centers, I want people to go out there to do some physical work, to roll around in the dirt, like another, like, again, buildings and people and their kids, over sterilized environments. Why do you think all these kids have allergies nowadays? They have all these weird problems when what they need to be doing as a child is going out to the field, rolling in the dirt, getting the bacteria, all the rest of that to get a healthy immune system. Yeah. And so, the earthing concept is really, it's really powerful. And last year I was, at the end of 2018, actually, I was going through my third bankruptcy, basically. I have a marketing agency where my clients didn't pay me during Christmas, so I lost my apartment, all my employees, didn't really know what to do. Luckily, because of my steak business, I've been able to continuously expand my network since university, which is extremely useful. So I ended up staying with a friend of mine for about a month, and then I had read this book, and I had never had the opportunity to actually go out and do this before. But then because I had no responsibilities and no employees, I said, hey, why not go out to a farm for 3 months and go do that? And I was 2 hours away from Warsaw, and I was out alone maybe for the first month. I'm like, man, this is taking a long time. I need to recruit some people. Yeah. What do I have that I can get people here? I was like, well, I have barbecue. That'll work.
Yeah.
So I used to invite people out for the weekend for barbecues. And then while they were there, I would have a rule that they had to do at least one shift of work during that day, and maybe like 4 or 5 hours of physical work or something like this. And, most of the people I know are not, like I used to go to the gym 4 times a week, but then I got out there and it's 6 to 7 physical hours of work a day. You understand what endurance is afterwards, right? So it was funny because the first couple of weeks I was shaping my body in a way that and I had allergies in there. Like at first, I was getting like scratched and rashes and everything. After about 3 or 4 weeks, totally cleared up. My endurance shot up, and then I was bringing people out there. And then obviously the key is once they're done working, you have to give them good food. Yeah. So I was doing also something called intermittent fasting, which I know you do as well. Yeah. But I was spending 3 hours a day cooking, and I was like, well, I have a smoker. So I would turn the smoker on in the morning, start the fire, put a brisket on, and then while I was working throughout the day, just toss the log in. And then at the end of the day, I had like 5 or 6 kilo brisket for dinner, essentially. Yeah.
So you're also into steak business?
Yes. Yeah.
So how does that work?
Well, it's like steak business. Here's the thing. This is why I'm not afraid of entrepreneurship, because what you think is, when you think that the free market works really well, it's not necessarily true. I've been in some large companies where the amount of disorganization and waste that goes around is incredible, right? And so when you are starting a new business and you want to discover things like the steak business I started, you start doing some research, And so like me being American, I love steak. It's just as simple as that, And so I started doing some research. And I then found out that Poland is the second largest exporter of beef in the EU, which I didn't know, because you can't find a good cut of steak in any store, like here, maybe Makro or something like that, but even then it's subpar, So I did the research. I found a guy who actually keeps the beef in Poland and dry ages it. and it's basically set up like a wholesale deal where I get a discount and I have a courier, so I get it, give it to the courier, and then I do same day delivery to the rest of Poland. Yeah.
Can also meat business would be sustainable?
Well, this is what I love. Yeah. So, and that's another reason why I love entrepreneurship is because you discover all these things. So originally when it started, I felt a little bit bad because the common, let's say, knowledge or common understanding is that beef and cows are not sustainable. Yeah. But then I started doing more research, and permaculture was part of that as well. And there's something called holistic management and rotational grazing. So and this is the problem with, and also like what really bothers me is this whole fight between like carnivores and vegans and all the rest of this. Yeah. Like it doesn't, like you can vilify all of these things, but at the end of the day, it's the method that you raise these things or the method that you grow it. Yeah. So like vegans that are eating soybean, well, I hate to tell you this, but basically like they're cutting down the Amazon to grow your soya for you. Yeah. And it's all monoculture, which again, depleting topsoil. And I think in the Amazon, some organic farmer in Costa Rica told me last year, they cut the trees, they get about 3 seasons of growth, and then they can't use the soil anymore. It's completely senseless, just short-term profit thinking. Yeah. And it's the same thing with cattle. And the same thing, so with that, you have factory farming, and this I understand. Yeah, I understand that, from a vegetarian and vegan perspective, the method that they raise these animals is completely unethical, like completely unethical. So like you have factory farms, or they leave them out on pasture for like the whole season. But the problem like that, like humans, is if you have chronic stress over long periods of time, it's really detrimental to the health of the ecosystem or your body, for example. Yeah. So what you're looking for is short, intense periods of stress. So what you do is, it's called the 3 M's, right? So we get some electric fence, you get the cows, and you figure out in one day, if you have the grass that's say about 1 meter tall, something like that, and you want to get it down to 20 centimeters, yeah, how much area do those cows need in order for one day to get it down to that level that you want? Yeah, it's like cow days. Yeah, and so you then figure that out, you figure out the area, and then you move the cows every day. Yeah, with the electric fence. Yeah, obviously you have to provide water. We do that through gravity-fed water systems. Yeah, just a natural way of watering them. And what you'll find is that by the 3 M's, moving, mobbing, and mowing, or like you have herds of cows. Number one is that they're not selective about what they eat anymore. They'll literally mow the whole thing, including all the weeds and all the stuff that's on your pasture, and they'll move on. And what you find is it's very beneficial to the land, and it's a carbon sink if you do it correct. Yeah. So this whole notion that cattle are not sustainable, it's horrible what we've done, because we've basically taken most of the animals, we've put them into large buildings where they're not in nature anymore, where they're supposed to be, and they've evolved for these millions of years to perform specific functions, and we've taken them out of that, and so now nature is going retarded as well. So one day, if like you're in the city, look at the trees around you, yeah, and what you'll see is on the bottoms of trees that are normally stressed, they have young shoots that come out of the bottom called suckers, yeah, and the function of animals is to prune that back. But without those animals, the nature becomes like humans without intense short periods of stress, like when you go to the gym. Yeah. Without that, they just become more unhealthy and more unhealthy. Right. So again, with the cows, and what's great is once you start understanding and recreating these kind of ecosystems, is you have the cows go through that system, and we do something called agroforestry. Yeah. Which is that's when people tell me that, oh, is it scalable? Can we solve all the world's problems? Yes, you absolutely can. Yeah. I mean, does a tree grow? Yeah. When you plant it? Okay. But what we do is we do agroforestry. So what you do is you put trees on contour on the same elevation. You make it wide enough that you can fit a tractor through it. And what you have is and then after that, once you've planted, so you come in with the bulldozers, you do all your water catchment, yeah. So basically, you tear the whole place up, you slow all the water down so that it actually sinks into the ground. So you're putting ponds, you put swales or ditches on contour, and then from that, right after you move all the earth around, people don't realize that the soil is full of millions of seeds, yeah, like millions of seeds, and all it needs is like a third of a second, a flash of light, and then the stuff will like grow in the soil. So you have to plant everything all at once. Yeah. And what you do then, you start with the chickens between, let's say, year 3 to 4. And those chickens, what they do is they get rid of your weeds. They do like the pest control. They fertilize the ground. They scratch it up, and they actually prepare the ground for more planting, essentially. Yeah. And so you're moving the chickens through. Then 5 years you can do pigs. 10 years you do cows, because the cows, they can damage the trees if you don't watch out. And then you put rotational grazing. And so, like I said, the cows you'd move every day, and then 2 to 3 days afterwards, you would have the chickens go through, because basically they eat the fly larvae out of the poo. You know, they move it around, and birds are pest control. So that's what gets rid of your insects. So for agroforestry, you have these trees that grow up, and after 10 years, that's habitat for birds, and those birds live in those trees, and then they do your pest control, and you start recreating this whole ecosystem. Yeah. So
sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
But looking at it from an angle of modern civilization, we are overpopulated in every capacity. Can we really think about the fact of having cows and like pigs and chickens and everything around every single bird? We don't even manage to get a house for ourselves. So everybody just, as you mentioned, modern architecture, like we're just having some small cubics in the corner, and most of us are going to go to our accounting job or whatever, just sitting behind the desk. Like, how do we have to somehow, again, going back to that sustainability, how can I really try to understand that I can still live, even be tech savvy, but at the same time try to live in a more harmonious lifestyle?
Well, part of it is, obviously if you're in the city, there are certain things you do. Like, but I would say the biggest problem we have nowadays, like we are a consumer society. Yeah. Like we overconsume. I mean, it's the amount of junk and packaging. I mean, like I've gone through multiple periods of bankruptcies before, so I can literally fit all my possessions into about 2 suitcases right now. Yeah. Now, have you been living in an apartment for about like 5 years? Every day you're coming back with something, and it's collecting and collecting and collecting. So the first thing that I encourage people to look at is basically to watch their overconsumption. The other thing I encourage people to do is to try and go back to natural products. Like, I mean, the stuff and chemicals that you're using in stores, like the deodorants and everything, these are not good for you. I mean, it's like you're basically slowly, chronically poisoning your body over your lifetime. So for example, I've switched just to natural soaps. I make, with some friends of mine, my own deodorant, for example, own toothpaste, that kind of thing. And I like to look at the amount of waste that people produce, and look at it that way. And in that way, if you can reduce that amount, you can have a much larger impact, say, than if you decide to stop eating animals, for example. Yeah.
Yeah. We have this interesting startup in Warsaw called Kurczak.
Yeah.
And what they do is that they cultivate meat.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they keep saying is that the amount of the impact that their cultivated meat has comparing to growing let's just say the animal, and also just definitely also consider the animal cruelty.
Yeah.
But if you're going to grow some animals, they're not going to have the same life cycle that we mentioned.
No.
So how do we have a sustainable way to cultivate meat, but at the same time try to still have that like a life cycle that you mentioned? So let's just put it this way. You have industrial part, you have the part that you're cultivating meat, and you have the other part. So how do you really find the optimal solution in that sense?
Well, the optimal solution. So the first thing is, let's think about the conventional way that they do things. Yeah. So they basically, they take, I don't know, about 10,000 chickens, 20,000 chickens. They put it into a large shed. They have to get all the feed that comes in, the ventilation, the antibiotics, all the rest of it. Now, why not just put them outside? That's where they're supposed to be in the first place. And mostly, like, chickens are omnivores. So they basically eat vegetation plus like insects, which is the protein source. So you still have to give them some kind of supplement on food. But for example, like sheep, rabbits, and cows are 100% grass fed. And so from that point, you basically just have to be moving them onto pasture that's, pretty well, like it's good pasture, and it'll improve over time, right?
Also corn fed, right?
No corn. No, because when you give a cow corn, all the beneficial effects from grass-fed, which is the omega-3s, change to omega-6s. And that happens in about 2 days once you start feeding them corn. Yeah.
But still, there are like different diets for them, right?
No, for cows they get 100% grass fed.
Okay.
Seriously, yeah. It's like there are a couple animals you can just do 100% grass fed, and beef is one of them. So, and it's sort of the last large herbivore that we've not made extinct.
Yet.
Yet, yeah. But I mean, there's so many cows now in the world that I don't think it'll ever really go. But yeah, we used to have aurochs.
I mean, we torture them if you don't extinct them, but
yeah. Well, and that's unfortunately what we're doing. So, so like one of the things I'm doing now is I'm approaching like the bigger companies and food producers, because the problem is like this is not well known enough. That's the biggest problem. And I've talked with these people, and people are concerned now. They can see that there's a problem. They can see that something needs to be done, but no one has a clear vision of what that actually is, right? I mean, it's like we said, there's all this greenwashing. All these companies they've sustainable in their yearly reports and everything, but what that actually is, no one can give you a clear answer. Yeah.
Is perma-agriculture one style of agriculture, or there are, for example, when you are in Europe, you have different type of environment. When you're in Asia, when you're in Africa, even North Africa and the South America, can we do one type of agriculture in every different area, or we have to somehow?
That's the thing is
Yes.
you have to get off of the concept of it being an ism versus it's actually a design, right? And in a design, your limitations dictate your design. So when you go to like countries like, like say in the Middle East, for example, like you have to totally take a different approach than if in the northern climates, right? Like up, Northern Europe, like you have the winter. So you need to build a root cellar. You need to be able to store your stuff over the winter time. But in the desert, you can be growing all year round. Yeah. I mean, it's because you just have that sunlight. And one thing that most people don't realize, like, what is the ideal temperature for photosynthesis? 25 Celsius. So in the desert, you need to put up trees. Trees provide shade. Also, trees are just an amazing things in themselves. I mean, the relationships that they have with the soil, and it's literally like a water lens around trees. So if you want to think about water and like the water crisis, one thing is gathering all your rainwater from your roof. Yeah, most like the way that the society works now is like in cities. You look at it, they take all that water, they channel it into some underground sewer, and they put it right back into like a river somewhere. But it's heavily polluting. And why not just cut, a piece out of the curb and channel that water into like a bed that has some trees or some bushes, for example. Yeah, so this is like really simple things like that. But again, going back to the water crisis. And this is another like concern as well, is we're starting to get extreme weather events. Yeah. Like, and you see that in Warsaw and a lot of other places where a cloud will come through, dump, a couple centimeters of rain in like, a couple like, in 20 minutes and 30 minutes, and you get flash floods. Yeah. So it's also like, it's getting back to that water capture. It's very important that we design systems where the ground can actually absorb the water that's falling down on it, essentially. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So take a look at a normal lifestyle, especially, whatever we can call normal post-COVID. How do we have to somehow try to push ourselves to keep the life that we have, but at the same time try to think of ourselves as a more sustainable lifestyle that is going to somehow not to cost us a lot?
Well, there's a couple of different aspects to that. Like, me, like I'm originally from the city, so I understand like what that life involves. Unfortunately, it's not, you're basically going between the place you live where you don't really know your neighbors, and then to an office where you spend all day, and then you repeat that. And then on the weekends, because you're doing the same work all the time, you go and get blitzed, right? and try and forget about your daily job, right? So so, I would say the first thing that people need, that I encourage people to do, is to find that work-life balance. Yeah, I mean, really, it's really people should have a couple different types of work: intellectual, physical, and they need that third bit, which is the spiritual or just socializing. That aspect. That's the first thing, because most people don't realize it. But like, why do you drink? Why do you smoke? Like where does that come from? And if you look at the list of the most dangerous things, right, on the like list of drugs, what is the most dangerous thing? Well, first, like alcohol, because people get drunk and do stupid stuff, yeah. And the second is smoking, because of lung cancer, right? and then all the rest of them underneath that. And why are those things legal? You know, like it's or like, where does this come from society, right? And also just look where the money is, right? That's a really easy answer. But getting back to people and how they can sort of figure that out. One is try and find that balance. Yeah, I mean it's I've seen far too many times families being ruined because the husband's always at work. He puts his work before family, and there's this whole conflict, or he's doing all the same work all the time, or she is, and then they end up taking it on their spouse, for example. Yeah, so you got to find that balance. And then the other thing is, and I don't want to sound cheesy, but community. You know, it's something that we don't have anymore. I mean, it's basically our family unit has been replaced by your job. Yeah. And we don't live in these small towns or communities anymore because we live in this huge metropolis, essentially, where, again, you're in an apartment and you don't know any of your neighbors, you know? And that's something I'm really attuned to because as like my steak business, actually, I don't make most of my money from the beef. I actually make it from doing dinners and barbecues and bringing communities together. Yeah. And I think another thing is that I really encourage people that as well as like food and music are the two things that can really bring people together, like really transcends all cultures. Yeah. And it is to like meet your neighbor, you know, find like-minded people. Yeah. Find the hobby that makes you happy, you know, like don't do all the same things all the time. And if you find that in your mind that you're better balanced and you're in that sense, then you will be a lot happier and society will be much happier as well. Yeah.
You mentioned the alcohol and smoking.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would always put stress above those things.
Yeah.
I even feel people who are obsessed about their weight, they're obsessed about the amount of the consumption of anything. They might be even more sick and more problematic than people who do all those things, but they just don't care that much.
Yeah.
A lot of times our biggest problem is that we care too much about things that we really don't have to.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, before I would eat this food, let me just try to put it into 4 different calculators just to try to make sure that I'm eating the right thing. Or you have to watch 700 different tutorials before trying to open up something, you know? So we live in Warsaw.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I really like about the city is the work-life balance that you mentioned. Like when we talk about, there was this very interesting article in New York, how to save $1,000 per month.
Yeah.
And that was just about not to drink beer every night.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, guys, just come to Warsaw. If you manage to spend $1,000 on beer, you are proper alcoholic. You just have to find a place for some, you know, like AA meetings because it's impossible to do it like that. You take a look at the rent. You take a look at even the fact that how close it is just to go to we have like a jungle, like proper forest right next to the city. Yeah. So I do really think that we have to have this balance. Not let's just say it's not a village, but it's also not like a New York of some sort. So how do we really feel like we can find this sweet spot, especially for people that they are not that much, like they were not born into be a city boy, but as you mentioned it, but at the same time, especially let's just say post-COVID, everybody want to have social distancing. What is better to be outside of a city to be a proper social distancing kind of guy?
Well, it's, I mean, you talk about stress, first of all, right? So the stress, and again, I think a lot of that stress comes from doing one thing all the time is a big thing. And finding, it's really the balance. I mean, and in post-COVID times as well, like, I mean, I understand everyone's different. Not everyone's going to want to go out to the countryside. Not everyone's going to want to do, you know, physical work and all the rest of this. Yeah. Because, you know, but I would say one thing, you would be surprised how appreciative people were last year when they came out to visit me on the farm. And I got them to do the first hands-on physical work that they've probably done most of their lives. And even a year later, I have people that come back to me and they're thanking me for the experience. Yeah. Like, and basically they're doing physical work for free for me, essentially. I feed them afterwards. Right. So there is that, no, but it's, because, you know, as in finding that sort of that balance and happiness and relieving your stress. Yeah. I mean, one thing I found is that, you know, you need a reset every once in a while. That's another big thing. So, I will go out to a forest with some friends, go camping, hiking. I used to love going hiking, but then now I do farming. But hiking was great. It was 3 days, and it's tough, but you come back completely mentally refreshed, even though you're physically exhausted. Yeah. And the one thing that I'm going to really try doing in Warsaw now as well is like I have a couple farms outside of the Warsaw like area, and starting like next year I'm going to be setting up some market gardens, some chickens and stuff like that as well, and inviting people just to come out, see how your food is grown. Oh, this is an animal, this is a chicken, and then basically getting people back in touch with nature and their food source. Yeah, because the stuff that you're getting from the supermarket is not. This is not good quality stuff. I mean, it's just the longer that you pick it, and takes to get from that place to the supermarket, the stuff that they spray it with, I mean, all that's, I mean, it's not very nutritious food. And this is why, like, again, intermittent fasting is fascinating to me, because most people think that you have to eat 3 times a day, right? And so people are panicking about COVID, like, oh, do I have enough money to eat 3 times a day? But actually, if you want to make it simple, just eat once a day, and you even start thinking better, right? I mean, it's you have mental clarity, because we as humans, like, we've really only been an agricultural society for about 12,000 years, and Homo sapiens have been around about for 200,000 years. Yeah, and so we actually have these mechanisms in our body to cope with fasting, and actually fasting is very healthy for people. It really purges the toxins out of your body, gets rid of a lot of the bad cells that you have, and yeah, there's people
and ketosis.
Ketosis, yeah. So. That eventually happens, yeah. So you can do like 2 or 3 day fasts, but ketosis is interesting because then you cut all sugar out, and that includes carbohydrates. And I love telling people about that, because they're like, "Oh, I'm not addicted to carbohydrates," and then you tell them we can't eat bread, and they're like, and that immediately there's a sign that they're addicted. It's like
There is a very interesting argument. They say that what if you could drink alcohol, but you would not have alcohol poisoning in your brain. So if you will make a drink that would be able to give you the same feeling of alcohol, but without the alcohol poisoning in your brain.
Yeah.
And I was like, but that does exist, and that's sugar.
Yeah.
So technically, when you drink any kind of a drink that is purely with sugar, you are poisoning your body the same way that you have it. So now let's talk about like when you give your kid, like a bottle of any kind of like a soda, and then you just say that, but no beer for you. But the reality underlying issue is, let's just see how much of that is marketing and commercial, and how much of that is really science-based.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about it. Like, all animals on Earth, what do they drink? They drink water. Yeah. What do humans drink? A bunch of crap, essentially. Like, I mean, it's water
is too plain for them.
Yeah, water's too plain, and it's crazy when you think about it, because as a child, like, how do you reward a child? Like, you're like, oh, you did a good job with this. Let me give you some jelly beans. Let's get you an ice cream afterwards. Yeah. And if you look, and they've done studies like on rats and people and everything, the same areas light up that the ones like for cocaine, essentially, and sugar is more addictive than heroin and cocaine. Like, that's just a simple fact. Yeah. But most people don't want to accept that.
That's why we just stick to the cocaine.
Yeah. Well, you read reports about, like, they test the sewage water, like in London, and it's just laced, like, it's basically society running on drugs, essentially. Yeah. Like the whole war on drugs, for example, it's like, what is the US, what were they trying to really stop? Because basically all these cartels are feeding like the United States or Europeans, essentially, with all these drugs. It's like, it's when you start boiling things down to the most basic human needs, you start understanding a little bit how ridiculous society can be sometimes. Yeah. And the sugar thing is fascinating to me because it's everywhere. I mean, it really is everywhere. And even in the past, let's say since the 1970s, what they've done is they've vilified fats as making you fat, which is completely not true. Like, it's they finally they're counteracting those studies with self-funded studies, but animal fat does not make you fat, and salt is not bad for you either. But what's happened now is they've taken the fat out of the food, so it has no taste anymore, and they've replaced it with sugar or salt. Yeah, but sugar for the most part. And so basically you have these food companies, and they're just selling one of the most addictive substances on earth. yeah, which is sugar.
Between the carnivore diet, vegans, vegetarians, paleo, and all the others, I know that everybody have their own opinion. And another thing that is also always important is that we're not the center of the universe. So it's not also about like what is the best thing for us. We also have to think about our environment. We also have to think about the animals and all the things that are happening to them. Where do we have to see a balance? Again, going back to your sustainability conversation and the idea that do things that we can live a bit longer than what we are doing. And again, by we, I mean not like me and you, but like the civilizations to
As
come.
a society.
Yeah. So where do you really feel is the balance?
The balance between the food we eat, or the
Yes,
balance
exactly.
between
Like
lifestyle?
how do we have to try to, first of all, try to say hypothetically, right? So I'm just gonna say that, you know what, I love meat, but then I was like, at the same time, there was this kind of like a meme or like some picture, and it was a cow, and then there was this kind of a nail gun, I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
That it was like, if you can pull the trigger, then go and eat it.
Yeah.
So I don't exactly know, let's just say, how to answer to that, because let's just say, as a person who, I mean, it doesn't sound hopefully too much a cliche, but like I literally hugged a cow.
Yeah.
So I can literally try to say that like they're not as stupid and as, let's just say, they are really friendly creatures.
Yeah. Very intelligent.
Very intelligent.
Pigs are super intelligent, by
Exactly.
the way.
I mean, if that wasn't a taboo in the culture, I really feel that as much as dogs, a lot of people could, just have a pet as a pig.
Yeah.
But a pig is a cat. Yeah. So what I'm just trying to take here is that, number one, how do we have to, first of all, be more responsible for our environment, and at the same time be honest with ourselves, not to try to just be vogue or try to just be presentable for others, but rather try to do something that is really impactful and at the same time healthy for us.
Right. This is a complicated question. So let's start with the basic assumption. The basic assumption is that we as consumers can vote with our wallets. Yeah. That's the argument that people give. However, if you look when you're living in the city and you look at the options that you have, your options are seriously limited. Like how do you go about like, and as well as if you want to eat healthy and get the health stuff, it's more expensive, right? It's literally 2 to 3 times the cost if you go to Ocean, for example. Yeah. So how do I answer that? I mean, I would encourage people, like, it's not happened in Poland yet, but in Western Europe, it's starting to happen already, where people are buying more local produce, right? Like in Switzerland, for example, like they've stopped going to large stores. They're basically only looking at local, and that's happened more in Western Europe. So one way is, but here's the other thing, right? Is that, and this is the important thing about COVID right now as well, is that most people, what is their number one limiting factor? It's time, right? So how are people expected to go find local food sources, go find farms, go do all the rest of this, right? So, I mean, I can point people in a couple right directions. Yeah, I mean, you have places like Lokalny Rolnik here, Rano Zebrano, Pora na Pora. And so these are distribution services where they connect the farmers to the end clients, right?
Yeah.
But again, it's expensive, right?
Very much.
So what I'm trying to actually do right now is I'm trying to give people as many options as possible. Yeah. So I'm trying to find the farms, point people in the right direction. And essentially what needs to kind of happen is that we need people to kind of bind the households with the farms, let's call it, so that people know they're farmers, essentially. Yeah. And that's what has to happen. And it doesn't exist. Like, I'll be honest with you. It doesn't exist. And it's literally impossible. If you wanted to be 100% sustainable nowadays, it's almost literally impossible, because there are all these options, but none of them are sustainable. Yeah, like really. I mean, between the packaging and the quality that you're getting. So one thing I'm working on right now is basically a database of sustainable products. So everything from food to diapers made from like hemp, for example. Yeah, I put an industrial hemp group together. You can do 50,000 uses of hemp, yeah, and replace literally most of the products in your household, yeah. And then another thing I'm working on as well is I'm working on something called farm to crypto. So essentially creating local currencies so that that money stays within a certain ecosystem. So it stays between the families, it stays between the farms, and there's like local trading essentially. Yeah.
Okay.
But again, all the solutions exist. What we're missing right now is we're basically missing people to basically quit their job, come join us, yeah, and basically create a sustainable society again, yeah. And I've put together a very large network. It's called EDEN, or the Environmental Development Education Network, where
Eden,
yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
so you make your own. Okay.
Yeah, well, that one I came up with the acronym first, and then I looked it up on Google. And I was like, hey, perfect fit, you know. So it's like,
awesome.
And basically we have this network of farms, but basically it's gonna take a lot of people. And the cool thing about COVID right now, which has happened, is that people now realize that they can work fully remote. You know, that's not as far gone as it was a year or two ago. It's really accelerated that process, and that's very powerful in itself, because if you have a people that actually live in their place, and you have multiple people living in the same area, like around the same time, you can start building communities. Whereas before you couldn't do that because people were in the office, right?
Yeah.
So, and again, I encourage people, if you want to get in touch with me, I'm more than happy to point you in the right direction, to get you in touch with the people that I know. And, you know, everyone's a bit different. So, you know, some people, again, it's finding those three roles: the physical, intellectual, and the spiritual. And the things that you don't want to do, well, just don't do it. Find someone else to do it. And if you have a community, figure out the roles for each person. And if there's a role that you can't fill, well, then put money together and hire someone to do it. Yeah.
So you're saying that this is not that much about the diet, but it's more about how you get your diet?
Yeah. It's really about how you get your diet. I mean, we can talk about carnivore, and, you know, that's another touchy subject. I don't really like to talk about diets with people because I don't like controlling people's diets. I think it's more of, people need to be more in tune with their bodies. If they change their diet or they start eliminating things and they start feeling better, then go down that route. Yeah. Like I really don't have a problem with that. I practice carnivore diet, just through old friends. I've done keto since, I think it started originally when I was 20 years old. I'm 34 now. And I've done it a couple times since then. The effects I have are great, but other people, they might want more of a plant-based diet, for example. Yeah. Which, there are reasons that I might argue not to do that, but again, it's not worth it to me because you're not going to change anyone's minds. So it's like,
so in order to change anything, we need time.
Yeah.
And if you want to change your diet, if you're a guy who works 10 hours a day and you have other things to do, all you need to do is that you have to have 5 minutes to eat your food. That is one of those tricky moments. Yeah. So a lot of rich people always talk about these things because they have time.
Yeah.
But we have people with no time on it.
Well, I think one of the things that could be most beneficial to people is learning how to cook. Like, it might seem like a lot of time to cook, but once you learn how to cook, once you figure out the cost savings from doing your own cooking, and there are places actually where sometimes it's cheaper to go to restaurants and cook your own stuff, but Poland is not like that yet. And learning how to cook. And I learned how to cook only about 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah, I was doing some mild stuff before, like made my mother's lasagna a couple times and everything. Then I got into beef, then I started smoking stuff. Then I got and actually the reason why I got into farming was because I was cooking, and then realized, number one, I couldn't afford the good produce in the stores. And number two, they didn't have the selection I wanted. Yeah, like chilies and all these variations of stuff I couldn't find. You have to grow it yourself. This is very simple as that. So, and again, it's like people might not have time, but the key to creating communities as well is, one is you have to have a shared purpose, right? So you have to have a common set of ethics, a shared purpose, and skin in the game, or that participation, is not money. It's putting time into it. Yeah. And that's really what skin in the game is. So, and again, you have to figure out your different roles. But again, if you learn how to cook, or if you don't like to cook, join a community where someone does know how to cook and figure out how to contribute in another way.
That's the problem when you talk about a guy who is doing agriculture and he's a ex-high frequency trader. Yeah. Do you want to explain what skin in the game is? You just jump from agriculture to Nassim Taleb, so...
Yeah. Well, skin in the game. So, Nassim Taleb, I haven't read his recent stuff, but Black Swan was huge in 2010. So my first job actually was high frequency trading. Yeah. So I've completely moved the other way, but after university, was in Scotland, I moved to New York. And there I was working for a small family fund doing something called, what's it called? Market neutral volatility arbitrage. Yeah. Doing something with options and equities and something else. Basically financial concepts that humans have put together that 99% of people cannot understand what it is.
So it's a perma finance.
Well, it's even worse than that. Well, actually, if you get down to nature, nature's interesting because how do things actually interact? It interacts on a quantum level. And quantum level is like there's so many interactions happening per second that we can't even begin to understand it, right? So high frequency trading basically is where you create algorithms and you're trading pennies, but like fractions of pennies a couple thousand times per second, essentially. Yeah, and you start accumulating like wealth over that amount of time, right? And 80-hour work weeks, on the computer the whole time, having no time to cook, right? But again, I managed to figure it out, right? So because I'm also like, I'm a bit like, I wouldn't call myself ADD, but like I've learned to deal with it over time. So one thing as well as that you learn as an entrepreneur is you learn how to manage your time. So whenever someone tells me that, oh, I'm too busy, that immediately tells them that they have no time management skills. Yeah. Like if you need to do something, you will make the time to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. My favorite joke about ADHD is that he says my nephew has a HD ADHD. It's a high definition attention deficit disorder. So he can barely pay attention, but when he does, it's unbelievably clear. So it's just, that's a point. But let's just say it's kind of an interesting conversation because we talk about agriculture. Sometimes people say that, I always want to be that guy in those fancy suits, in those places that, like people just come out with like $10,000 suit and God knows whatever else around them. Yeah. But coming out of that lifestyle and then try to go in a farm and then try to, just be around the mud and, like everything else around it.
It's been a long transition, I'll put it that way. But yeah, it's like...
And that's also where it comes into your vocabulary. Like you talk about like black swan terminologies in the middle of an agriculture conversation, and that somehow like shift things. Like you were talking about cooking, and for me, like Ottolenghi is the guy for cooking.
Okay.
And like even like his book Simple. I mean, really take a look at it. Simple. I mean, it is not really simple, but you really try to understand that when a person comes from a different background, everything just always stays with them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, so let's talk about high frequency trading for a while.
Yeah, why not? Like start with agriculture and just jump into high frequency trading.
We'll start with the basics in agriculture, go backwards towards high frequency trading, right? So it's wow, talk about like a esoteric like industry. I mean, just when what's interesting is I'm a person that I can take complicated subjects and I can very easily explain them to people, right? So even while I was pitching this hedge fund that we had to different people, even though we were doing something quite complicated, I was able to sort of get the person to understand what it is that we were actually doing, right? So what's interesting about high frequency trading is in 2010, about 60 or 70% of the volume of the New York Stock Exchange and all the other exchanges was high frequency trading. So not human traders, but it was high frequency trading. Okay. And with high frequency trading, what's interesting is that you have two different strategies, right? You either compete on speed, which is what all the big guys used to do. So like JP Morgan, they had something called co-location, right? So they would stick their servers as close to the New York Stock Exchange servers as possible to get the fastest price signals back and forth. Yeah. They also put in like a couple $1 billion fiber optic line between Chicago and New York so that they could, cut off a couple milliseconds. There was a good film I saw recently called Hummingbird. Really, and it was kind of like the insanity but so like, again, going back to high frequency trading, right? So what you have is you have a whole market that is completely human created. And then they've created a system on top of that was using, let's call it the beginning stages of AI, right? And so like I said, you compete on speed or you compete on strategy, right? And most of these guys are competing on speed. But what happened when I was there in 2010 is there was something called the flash crash. And this was just absolutely wild, where basically like within the span of a couple hours, like Procter & Gamble stock went from like $60 down to like $15 and then back up within the span of 3 or 4 hours. Yeah. And our options portfolio, because we had a leveraged portfolio, went something from like 20 million to 70 million to negative $60 million, all in a couple hours, right? And so after that, I went to a conference or symposium where some guy had done some research, and they have something called the best bid and ask system. So you have 7 or 8 exchanges in the U.S.
Best
Best bid or ask system. So basically, there are 8 exchanges. So all of them trade Google. So it'll check between all the exchanges to see where the best price to buy is, essentially. Yeah. And what he said was, what happened is that there was a delay between at least 3 of the exchanges where they didn't get the price quotes back in time. And the algorithms picked this up as the exchanges were kind of like down and broken, and they basically exited all the trades. And what happens when you eliminate 60 to 70% of the volume trading of the market? Yeah, you get wild, wild price swings, you know? And this was, for lack of a better word, show. Yeah. Like I went out the next day after that, and there were people with t-shirts saying, "I survived the flash crash." Yeah. But a lot of people go broke. And, you know, and it's interesting because I was working 80-hour work weeks. You know, we're talking about quality of life. You know, I went out like a couple of nights. I spent like $6,000 in a night, came back and was like, if I did this in Warsaw, I could have spent 400 zloty, you know, and like I went through the whole thing. And after a year of it, and because I'd been living in Europe for a long time, I was kind of immune to that. What society tells you is, oh, this is like the pinnacle of life, and, you know, the fancy suits and the car and the apartment, trophy wife, you know, all the rest of that stuff. And after like the 80-hour work weeks, I just decided it wasn't worth it anymore. You know, I mean, it was not to mention the fact that a human created system like Wall Street, you know, like something that could happen. And again, you still have these panics, and there was still like, you know, that was after 2008, and, you know, there was Greenspan before that. And, oh, we've conquered. There are no more boomer bust cycles and everything. And like now, like I still have friends in Wall Street. I still understand how the financial markets work. And like, people should be scared what's going to happen, because what's happening in the real economy and what's happening on the stock market are totally unrelated, like completely unrelated. And I was reading an interesting report like about a month ago that said now they have these applications where small investors can invest, and they've been using like basically options contracts to keep these prices going up as well. And they're now the majority of the trading versus where you had like hedge funds or mutual funds before trading that stuff. Yeah. So there's some really weird price inaccuracies in the market. And, you know, now the second wave is here. I'm just waiting for the crash to happen. And like, you see signs, Bitcoin's like shot up now because basically people are going to safety. And actually what's interesting this time is that the safety, everyone kind of flocked back to the US dollar like in 2008. But this time it's actually the EU, the euro, that's more stable, because the federal, like this quantitative easing, you know, they're printing like 20% of the money market or even more. And you can't do that for that long before the whole thing collapses. You know, I mean, just fundamentally, it just doesn't work. You know, so
there's this whole conversation around, is the economy the stock market? Because even if you take a look at most of the conversation, everyone's like, oh, take a look at the stock market. The economy is doing well. Yeah. But isn't the economy much bigger than the stock market?
Oh, it's yeah. And people need to realize, I understood this from even when at school, is the price of shares or the stock market is what people think the price is. So, you know, you've had like, there was the tulip market, you know, there's huge fiascos in terms of finance in the past because people think that's what it is. But actually, when you boil down to it, like WeWork is another great example, you know, like huge billion-dollar valuations. And you look at the fundamentals and you're like, wait a minute, something is not right here, you know? And it's interesting because you have to have like, first you have to be brave, you know, because when you think how in a different way than society thinks, you usually get shunned, you get accused of things. And it takes a brave person to kind of come out and be the contrarian in the whole situation, you know? So it's, we're in very interesting times right now. I think I mean, China's managed to bounce back, but China has its own problems. They're having food shortages right now. I don't know if you heard about this. Last year, they had to cull about 60% of the pigs in the country because of a swine flu going around, essentially.
Wow.
And pork is a huge, huge industry in China. Like it's the number one meat that they eat. Europe as well, for example. But and that's the other thing that people don't realize is that we think we're in a crisis right now. I mean, the food crisis is that if we continue doing what we're doing, we are in deep trouble. I mean, it's like, it's really, once you have a virus that, wipes out 60% of pigs, this happened in the US a couple of years ago as well, and what's it called? Cow, it's the problem. Like, if you put animals into dark, like places with no direct sunlight and not good ventilation, you will breed disease. It's that simple. That's why I have to pump them full of antibiotics to not get sick, right? So there's all these like fun, and also like the food waste. I think US wastes about 50% of their food. So when people say, "Oh, you'll never be able to do, use permaculture, or we can't, the system is as efficient as possible," well, how about we first eliminate 50% of the food waste? Yeah, like we can just start with that, for example.
Yeah. Where did you get the idea to be a high frequency trader?
Just by chance. It's one of those things like when you're in your 20s, and when you're coming out of, a teenager and, you're growing up. So, when I grew up, everything was about, to be successful and to be the best, you go into finance. Yeah. And that was the idea. And I graduated university in 2009.
It's parental messaging.
Oh yeah. Well, parental messaging, like my father, he gave me some horrible advice as a kid, which I thankfully never listened to, right? Because the first advice was, well, you should join the military, right? And he's at ROTC, they'll pay for your university, all the rest of this. And then like the second Iraq war happened, I was like, maybe not such a good idea. Then in around 2007, he was like, you should study to become a lawyer because once you graduate, you'll always have work. Then the 2008 financial crisis happened. That was also not true, yeah? Then a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, because he wants me to be, he's always been, both my parents were in the Marine Corps, right? But when you really get down to it, they're basically bureaucrats, yeah? I mean, they manage large government budgets, right? And it's a different way of thinking completely. So he wanted me always to get a steady government job, career, and all the rest of this. But the last one, I almost had to, I didn't know what to think. I just shut my mouth and just didn't say anything. But he was like, you should join the ICE in the US, yeah, like immigration like services. And I was like, what? Like, do you not read the news and what they're doing now? I was like, it's just absolute insanity, right? But again, it's this generation change of thinking. And that's the one thing that really gives me hope nowadays though, yeah, because we've gotten ourselves in this situation because the old way of thinking was shareholder value and everything for profit, and there was no consideration about the environment in it. But now that's switching with the millennial generation. Now it has to do with people, right? So the ethics with people and environment's now coming into that as well. And I noticed as well, because I built out this large network. So I know people from ages of 13 all the way to like 90 plus, right? And you notice the changes in attitude over the generations towards environment. And the really old people, like the 80 plus, they still remember the way that they used to do farming. They still remember like sustainable packaging, which was glass and, and like paper and other stuff. And then you have like the baby boomer generation. So like my parents, right? And they're like consumption, growth, and there are unlimited resources. Yeah. But that's why we're in this situation. And then you have me, and like I'm the millennial generation, and some millennials have woken up to this. Some millennials are still addicted to their phones, still addicted to social media, the consumer lifestyle, but some of us have woken up. And then you have, let's say, like the generation now coming into adulthood who are very environmentally conscious. So it also is really encouraging for me to see that attitude in society, we've recognized that there finally is a problem, we need to do something about it. And that really gives me hope, because it's going to take all generations, but at least the new one coming up is they're in tune. I'll put it that way. Yeah.
Do you think is it easier if we have different messaging from the just say younger generation parents than even trying to change the society? Like somehow try to say that, let's try to teach maybe parents, maybe they can try to tell their kids something a bit more different, a bit more profound.
Well, education is where it all starts. I mean, education is the most important thing that you can do, because really, like the when you want to mold a child, yeah, you can basically do it between the ages of 5 to 8 and in their early teens, yeah. And if you can influence them during those times, it sticks with them, like it sticks with them for most, like the rest of their life. And this is like statistically proven, right? So one of the things that I'm really doing right now is I'm going to schools and I'm teaching kids between ages of 5 to 8 how to actually plant their food, eat the food, because just by doing it for that short period of time, that stays with them for the rest of their life. Yeah. And with education, again, it's like, even with like the parents and everything, it's, you know, again, like there are these people that live outside of society, kind of, yeah, they call it the deviance of society, you know. But most people are not those people. Most people kind of conform to society. They conform to modern ways of thinking, which maybe aren't necessarily correct anymore, yeah, or there's, you know, the thinking has changed. So it requires that re-education, and you know, and getting to change and all the rest of this, right? I mean, it's really important, because people are afraid of change, you know, like that's the thing. When a person gets comfortable, and, you know, a person's normal, let's call it life cycle, if you want to call it, is, you know, so they go to some school, which then teaches them like certain topics, subjects, you know, gives them words to these things, teaches them like what they should do. So like, you know, like I was taught, right? Go to college, go get a job in finance, right? Make a lot of money, but ruin most of your life because you're working over 80-hour work weeks, right? Get a wife, get a mortgage, have kids, get divorced, you know, and like, and go through that whole cycle. But at some point, I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, I was like, why, if society has taught us to prioritize these things that are not necessarily healthy, like they're not healthy decisions for people, right? And I've seen it because I grew up in international schools. So my friends' parents were like, you know, CFO of Heineken, yeah, or like another guy, PepsiCo, and all these huge corporations. And so you talk to these guys and they're near retirement age, and they're kind of like, damn it, like what did I spend my life on? And when you see that, you realize, wait a minute, like, so if society's telling me to do that, but these guys are now saying that that's not true. And it's not like it's hidden, but you have to ask questions, right? And the problem is that people just accept things too often, when you should constantly be questioning everything, like always, yeah. I mean, and especially nowadays with what's happening with like fake news and all the overload of information and all the news channels, it's and again, people don't have time. So like, you know, I like to read 3 different sources. I like to, you know, go through all the options and kind of get all the viewpoints and everything. But for most people, you have to keep like a critical mind, because if you don't, then you will be led down a path that maybe is not the right thing for you. Yeah.
You know, Veritasium, the YouTuber, he has a really interesting video about the boredom,
Okay.
and how much boredom is good for you.
Yeah.
Like, when was the last time that you were bored?
Not for about 10 years.
And that's the point. Sometimes really just doing nothing might be the most, you know, proper way of taking 1 hour of your time. Yeah. Because the moment you're bored, you think of doing something new. Yeah. I don't think anybody would really think of change when they have no time to be bored.
No. And you know, that's the thing. Like I woke up one day and now I wake up at 5 o'clock every morning. I have a litany of things to do. Like, you know, once you kind of find that purpose, and it's not easy to do. Yeah. But I'll tell you one thing is that if you can figure out a way to somehow help the planet that we're on right now, it's very rewarding, and it doesn't have to be farming. It can be something else. But once you have a purpose that you feel like ethical about, right? And my current ethics now, even with all the rest of my companies, is it has to be planet, people, and profit in that order. Yeah. And if I'm not doing that, then I'm unhappy. But if you can find that, or find some niche that where you can fulfill those things, then it's eye-opening, like really, because I see the people. I've lived in these large cities. People, you know, the commute to work back and forth, they're just miserable. Like how many people do you know that are happy at work with their jobs? You know, it's just like in the same thing every day. So it's tricky. And you know, and I say that like it's easy, right? But I know it's not easy. I mean, I know it's extremely difficult. I mean, and again, going back to change, right? So how do you take that step forward, right? And I don't really have the answer to that, but one thing, like going back to this community, is find a group of like-minded people, find a support group so that, you know, if you do take that chance, you have those people around you to encourage you. And if something does go wrong, they can support you as well, for example.
Yeah, but taking a look at your lifestyle, I'm not talking about that.
No.
I'm mainly talking about a person who wakes up, they take a look at their phone. Let's just take a look at my timeline on Facebook, what is happening on Twitter. Let's open YouTube. And then by the end of that, you already feel like, oh shit, so it's 2 hours of my time. No working out in the morning. I'm late for work. I'm going to go to work, commute. Again, something that is a bit funny in Warsaw, but let's just say if you're from Jersey and you want to go to New York, let's sit down and talk about that. Let's just say you spend a lot of time, again, on the subway or whatever other commute you're using. You go to work, then think about the efficiency of you at work. You finish your work in a, as you mentioned, in a closed environment, not so many, let's just say, positivity around you, not touching the nature. Everything is so artificial around you. Again, commuting back home, eating a food that is not exactly going to be made the way that we discussed that. Again, not having time, opening up the first social channel that we have, the TV,
Netflix and chill.
Netflix and chill. and then it's just like, and let's just say again, another topic that I really feel that we have to have a much longer conversation about sleeping. Of how you sleep, and then you wake up on the same cycle. When this girl is going to really think that, you know what, I need to change, but 24 hours per day, when exactly in that 24 hours I have to think about a change. Because none of the things that we discuss is constructive. None of those things would even let you 5 minutes to think about a change. So you wake up 10 years later because maybe one of those things is broken. Exactly.
You by.
When it was like, okay, I lost my job at COVID. Or what am I going to do? How am I going to change? Or you know what? I moved to a new city. What am I going to do? How am I going to change? But the moment that cycle is not broken, we don't even know why we're living. We're just living the way that we set ourselves, either again by our parents or by ourselves or by the society.
Or distractions on your telephone.
Or the distractions on the telephone. Exactly. Exactly. So where do we really have to, let's just say that we're not talking about a privileged point of view. We're not talking about people that they have so much money, they have so much time, and they don't know what to do. We're talking about everybody. I'm not going to change the topic, but I'm just going to say that even in the politics, one of the things that we see is that, like me and you are talking about the lifestyle, and we think that everybody can choose their lifestyle, and then we'll be as much on touch. You know, we're not going to be like touching the biggest part of the society. And that is exactly what is happening in politics, and that is what is happening in every. So let's don't go there. Let's really talk in a way that even a person that somehow has a lifestyle that cannot be exactly tailor-made for themselves, how everybody can somehow benefit from these things.
Benefit. So basically how to make, let's say, lifestyle changes where they can benefit.
How we have to let everybody to literally have those regenesis, we discussed it, you know. How do people really how can we enable people to hit the refresh button?
So I mean,
would you like to right now be a high frequency trader in New York, or you want to right now enjoy your life having your own stake and being in your own farm?
So how do you get to that point? I mean, well, I would say the first step is that, you know, prioritize what is the most important thing to you, right? And I actually had to go through this the tough way, which was through bankruptcies. But every time I would go through a bankruptcy, I would think, all right, what is the most important thing to me right now? So the first thing is sleep. Like if you're gonna spend a third of your day, 8 hours sleeping, it's probably kind of important, right? So the first thing I really encourage people to do is get good sleep, get a comfortable mattress, comfortable pillow, and you'll see how much better your life is once you get good sleep, right? There's a good example, like a couple of years ago, I was sleeping on some pull-out couch, had a bar down the middle, and the rest of this, I was in like really like crappy pillows. And then I was like, wait, so sleeping is important. And I went to the store, bought a 400 zloty pillow, and I've slept like a baby ever since, And just by making a small change, you have a huge effect afterwards. Like huge effect. And that's also something that people need to like keep in mind, right? There are certain little tweaks you can make to your lifestyle. Like don't check your phone in the morning when you wake up. Yeah. This kind of things that if you do that and repeat it over enough time, you can make large, effective, like huge benefits to your time. Essentially, it's 1% things that you change, and you just repeat that over and over again. Yeah. The next thing is, I really encourage people to look at the food you're eating. Try to mix things up, because once you like look at your shopping basket, look how much money you're spending on processed goods, on sugar, on that kind of stuff. Yeah, and I would encourage people to get a healthier diet, but again, it's like, how do you do that? And in every situation is different. For me, it's gardening. Yeah, I think just doing some kind of physical work outside in sun, even just for an hour or two a day, is a huge benefit. But doing the same thing all the time is not going to be healthy for you, right? So you got to find that physical, intellectual balance again, and to make those small changes. And again, is people think that they have to do it alone, but that's not true. Like again, finding that local community that you get along with, or you have some common goal together. That's a huge benefit to you, because once you start realizing that if you're able to cooperate with people versus controlling people, you can accomplish multiple times of what you'd do if you're doing it alone, for example. Yeah.
Okay, so we can try to somehow have a better lifestyle. At the same time, one of the problems that we have is, let's just say, even what we're doing. We're having a podcast. There are thousands of other podcasts.
Yeah.
One of them is selling paleo. The other one is selling veganism. The other one is selling carnivore diet. The other guys are selling one religious society. The other one is selling. Everybody's selling something. How do we have to just say that what is what? Because also I really have a feeling that right now, even though that even we are right now generating some, let's just say more data, but I think we're having too much data right now.
Yeah. So
like
overload.
Overload.
Yeah.
Overload.
Yeah.
Like there was a time that I would go to library and then try to open up encyclopedia. And I was like, oh no, I didn't know that. Those days are past. And now when you really open up something, you see there are 7 different versions of the reality. One of them is written too much water is bad for you. The other one is written too much water is good for you. The other says that the water doesn't matter. And I was like, what am I going to do with my life? Like Adam was just saying to do this, but then Joe said don't do that. So where do we have to get our information? Because I really don't want to just bash into this whole fake news and everything, because I really don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Talking about quantum realm and like relativity and everything, has a lot to do with who would see it from which angle. I'm just trying to put it in this way, that if you really try to put things into context, is there any way that we try to understand that we're happy? Is there any way we try to understand that we're healthy? Is there any kind of a base for these things?
Everyone wants to be happy. Right. I mean, I work in I have a marketing agency. So this whole lifestyle, and I write these studies on people. Like, what do they do when they wake up in the morning? How do they get to work? What do they do throughout the day? Do they have kids? Do that whole lifestyle. And what you find is that, and then we do an empathy map, it's called. Yeah. So basically you get an image of the head and you look at what do people see? What do they hear? What do they think? And what do they say and do? And what they think and what they say and do are 2 totally different things a lot of the time, right? So, like you said, what needs to happen is a person needs to assess what is important to them. Yeah, for me, the things that are important to me and make me happy is people, food, and music. Yeah, those are the 3 things. So I went and did those things. Yeah, like of course I'm an entrepreneur, so I started some companies around it and all the rest of it, but figuring out what is important to you is the most important thing. And a lot of times, because like you said, society teaches you what is important. Your job teaches you what is important. But I would encourage people, especially during the second wave that's happening right now, when you have the time to sit back and think about it, think to yourself, what makes you happy? What are those things that you would like to do more of, right? And go do those things. Block off an hour, at least like every couple of days to do those things, yeah? Because the problem is that there's such, like you said, an overload of information, an overload of all this stuff that's happening around us, is that we tend to forget about ourselves. Yeah, because we're doing it for our kids, or we're doing it for our wife, or but at some point you have to be you have to think about yourself. Yeah. And you have to think what's going to make you happy, and then dedicate some time towards that. And I think that's the big thing that people need to do. And it's really just really getting back in touch with your own thoughts and yourself. Yeah. It's, which is, like you said, that information overload everywhere. And if you can figure that out, then you're more than halfway, like really. Like,
do you think people can make their lives out of agriculture in these days?
Oh, absolutely. You would, like I was mentioning a while back, is that basically 95% of the margin goes to all the middlemen, like all the companies and everyone in between that. Like, again, I have a marketing agency, so if you want to learn how to farm, I'm more than happy to teach permaculture, and then afterwards teach you how to do the marketing. Yeah. And there's huge margins to be made. I mean, really, really huge margins, because when you do going back to permaculture, what you're doing is, first you're doing the water capture, so you're not paying for water anymore. Then you're putting what's called perennial plants, right? So you plant them once, like asparagus, and it grows for 20 years every season for you, right? So there's no inputs, right? So there's no fertilizer, there's no chemicals, herbicides, all the rest of that. So when you take and you don't have to build these $1 million sheds for the animals, right? So when you take all those huge investments that go into a farm and how they teach you how to do it, and take that out and basically work with nature. And I love permaculture as well, because it teaches people to observe what is happening around them, to take a step back, to see, all right, if I change this, what is the effect? How does this thing like grow, right? And it's a really powerful thing in terms of thinking, because I don't think in terms of what's going to happen in 3 months. I don't think what's going to happen in a year anymore. I think what's going to happen in 10, 20, 80, 150 years when I plant something. And it totally changes your perspective, yeah? So I think farming is if you're willing to do it, and again, like you need, like it can get lonely out there. Yeah. Like there's definitely that aspect.
It's the same thing behind any table in any corporation.
Yeah.
So I don't think anybody would just feel
true,
like,
yeah.
oh, I feel so happy just, like sitting behind my laptop, just crunching numbers.
Yeah. So it's the same.
Especially during the COVID time.
Yeah.
You're at home, sitting in your pajamas, pretending that you're at work.
Yeah.
And there was this funny point. It was written like, honey, am I right now home, like doing the work, or am I at work, try to pretend to be home? Like these concepts are kind of like getting so blurry.
Yeah. That concept's totally fuzzy, but no, again, there's huge amounts of money in this. I mean, agriculture is a huge business, and it's huge. And, and more it's being controlled by larger companies, but there's always room for small farms. I've been to these places, I've seen them work, and it's totally possible to do, like really. And I would encourage people, if they want to learn more about it, they can go to greenstitute.com. It's sort of this education website I set up. I'll put some more videos on there for small farms, and give me requests. I have an encyclopedia now, so like ask me and I just find you the source, yeah. And look at it, because it's really what is needed right now. It's hugely in demand by all of society, from people working in large corporations down to smaller families, and yeah, I think it's a great way to do it. There's food tech, which is like the next stage, and there's other roles in there. But really, in order to have a stable society, we need permanent agriculture. That's as simple as that. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a few questions. Hypothetically, I'm unemployed because I lost my job in COVID time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have money to buy a farm. Can I just get a farm that would hire me without any skills to go there and try to make some money out of it?
Well, let me put it this way. So there's a couple different ways that you can do this. Yeah. One of the things is people think that you have to buy the land, lease the land for a season. It doesn't cost much at all. Yeah. Especially when the farmer doesn't have to put inputs into it during that year. Right. So that's a really powerful way to do it. For small farms, the most effective return per meter, one is market gardens, but that takes a lot of labor, but your per square meter is good. But it's like you're actually putting rows of crops in and doing like intense cultivation. Oh, and by the way, no tilling. Yeah. I don't do any plowing, any tilling. Don't disturb your soil, and it's fine. So that eliminates that work. Then you don't do watering, so that eliminates that work, yeah, because you've done your water catchment. And so you use market gardens, and then chickens, because chickens are essential on every small property, and they give you the highest like return per land. But again, you need to move them, so that requires like once a day for 20 minutes you can move the chickens around. And then, but again, you like it's to make that transition is not easy. There are places where you can get PDC courses. They're called permaculture design courses. I found them in Europe. They cost like 300 euros or something like that to get certified. Yeah. And then from that point, I mean, what you'll find is the reason why the large companies control so much land is because everyone has moved into the cities. Like loads of people moved into cities. So it's really quite simple to go to a place, find a place 2 hours radius from a city, and you'll find there's a brain drain. There's not very many people there. There's old people left only. And these people own this land, and they, you know, their children will take it and try and sell it. But if you actually have the knowledge, and permaculture is not difficult because it can be, but literally if you're doing 5% better of what they're currently doing right now, it's still better, right? It's, you can try your hardest, or you can try your hardest, and literally even if you don't do that well, you're making a huge difference. Yeah. And then from that point, it's basically finding your local customers. But again, I can teach marketing. I guarantee 300% return on ad spend in my company, so I'm pretty good at what I do.
300%.
Yes.
Wow.
Learn sales funnels, learn your customers, and find your product to market fit. Yeah, it's as simple as that. And basically, Google and Facebook have all the customer data that you need. It's just a matter of learning how to use those tools to get direct sales to your clients. Yeah, like.
So now I'm just going to change my hat. Now I'm an investor. Mm-hmm. So there are other options for me to put my money there. Would you still recommend me to put my money in the perma agriculture?
For returns? Yeah. It's the first thing is you get an immediate return, like after the first season from the property. There might be some upfront investment, but like the marketing, because, you know, I used to work on Wall Street, right? If you're doing 10% yearly return, you're a stellar hedge fund, yeah? So marketing can return 300% return on ad spend. And with permaculture, if you get land and you renovate it and rebuild the topsoil, you can triple the value of the land in under 5 years. Okay? So not only do you have an asset that's giving you a return every year, but if you want to, and it also, investors love it because they're not investing in some tech company that has some idea with some software where if the founder leaves, all the value goes away. They're investing in a hard asset, right? And then so they invest in that. Then you set up like some operations, they're getting revenue from that, and they can sell it off after 5 years and then triple the money on the land. Yeah.
So now, what if I'm a scientist? Mm-hmm. Which kind of sciences can really, I'm going to say it in two ways. Which kind of sciences can benefit from studying the perma agriculture, mm-hmm. and which kind of let's just say things you need from them? Is it biology? Is it like chemistry? Is it like a?
That's the thing. It's like it's everything. It's really it's all encompassing. It's you know, it's a positivist movement. It involves all fields. Yeah. Unfortunately, like these really specialized roles, like basically you don't need veterinarians, for example, because like if the animal dies, well, do you want a weak animal? No, you have enough animals that you breed better animals. Yeah. And then with chemists and physicists and all the rest of this, like it's that's where the interdisciplinary thing really comes in. Yeah. And of course, like there are still roles for these people. Like in order to create a sustainable society, it's not just out on the field on the farm. There'll still be vertical farms in the cities. You'll still have community gardens. You need like people with aquaponics skills, for example. You know what aquaponics are? So you have hydroponics, which are basically, they just have a closed loop system that feeds the roots of the plants. Aquaponics, you put a fish tank into it. So basically the fish manure is cycled through that. The plants take up that, and then you feed some of the plants to the fish, essentially. Yeah. And so it's a closed loop system. And it's not considered sustainable, but appropriate use of technology. Yeah. So if you're in the middle of a large city like New York, it pays to have these systems because you can create a lot from nothing, essentially. Yeah.
But in New York, there is no land. I mean,
there's rooftops.
The rooftops.
Yeah, it's a lot of rooftops.
I also heard about the beehives and the rooftops. That was a really interesting concept.
Yeah.
I even saw there's a shopping center, Arcadia, that even they are putting some beehives on top of it.
Did they?
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh. I might have to go talk to the owners then.
So that's one of the things. That's a very funny way. Yeah.
Well,
so you can do rooftops.
Yeah, rooftops. Yeah, rooftops are great. I mean, basically any unused space. The problem again really is it's stacking functions, right? So we think as things as one dimensional a lot of the time. But like go to the roof of your building. Is it being used? If not,
is there any database of how many rooftops are available?
No, that's a good idea. Yeah, we use some artificial intelligence, map it out, and see what's available.
I mean, come on. All you need is a drone, artificial intelligence. Yeah.
Well, I actually have a contact to a guy right now. He has his own LiDAR software. So the way they used to survey land, they have to come in, like, measure with the lasers and stuff like this. He just flies a drone over the thing and you get a whole terrain map. So it's like...
PwC in Poland, they have the division called the Drone Solutions. Mm-hmm. And they're globally right now supporting lots of different environment. And all they do is the exact same thing. Yeah. I mean, I'm not very much knowledgeable about what they do, but for example, like even about the, if you want to see if the land is dry, you technically don't have a specific method, but when the drone goes at the top, then you can understand which part needs more water and which part needs less. And even like if you're putting anything, then those drones can give you far better statistics around it. Yeah. But I really feel a lot of people feel these things are too like fancy for them. Yeah. And even what you mentioned, so we can technically have our business at the rooftop that is already just being. I don't even know what they do in the rooftop.
Rent the rooftop. There's a great story I heard one time from the guy Bill Mollison wrote this book, the Seoul Olympics. Yeah, this was in the 1980s, I think. Some Australian guy got the contract to supply the bottled water for the Olympics. So he went back to his hometown in Tasmania, rented the football or the soccer pitch roof, collected all the rainwater, put it through like some sand and gravel filters, and bottled it.
Wow. Okay.
So there's a lot of times where, again, with that out of the box thinking, you can create a lot of value to that. Yeah. But yeah, there's the rooftops, but there's really, and again, these things might be over the heads of maybe other people, or these people think that way. But that's, again, why you have to work with others, because some people are capable of doing that, while other people, their contribution can be taking care of the gardens, for example. Yeah. And again, there's this technology aspect to everything. I think there's appropriate use, but there's some really, really good solutions out there now, really, and they just have to be applied. And you don't have to create it. You just need to go find it. Yeah. It's like...
Awesome. Look, I want to still keep the topic, but one thing that is also still is a big elephant in the room is that why are you in Warsaw? Because a lot of people, when they say that, like I used to live in New York, and you walk around Warsaw and everybody was like, oh, wish one day I will be in the New York.
Yeah. Well, no, I get it double, because like you're from California, you lived in New York. Like,
I mean, right now with the wildfire and the water system and the weather system and the homeless problem and the tax problem. Yeah. If you would be from Texas, I would maybe just say the same thing. Yeah. But right now, do you know this plate? Don't California my Texas.
Yeah. I've seen that.
I am not right now trying to say.
Well, even when I was a kid, we were driving through Montana one time, and people were rolling down their windows, honking at us, like, "Go back to California." It's like they really, really just hated it. Like, no, Warsaw. So, I kind of grew up here, right? So, like, I've lived here from the age of 12 to 18, essentially. Went to the American School of Warsaw, it's an international school here, middle school and high school. So I have that relationship, and living in New York, you begin to understand that your quality of life is all dependent on money there, because it's such a money-centered place that in order to live well, you need to be making like at least $250,000 per year. Yeah. I used to make that kind of money. I had friends who were making, $250,000 plus their bonus, double that. And at the end of the year, they had maybe $5,000 left, right? Half from taxes, the rest of it from rent, eating out at restaurants, getting, your, what's it called? Dry cleaning, all of it. And at the end of the day, you have no money left. Yeah. So, and like I said, like I was, and again, like I used to party a lot, right? And from the age of 14 to 33, I was just nonstop just going, right? And I spent one night, I spent thousands of dollars, and I thought to myself, I could have spent literally $120 and had the same amount of fun in Warsaw. So, and I think Warsaw still has that spirit. Of course, things have changed a little bit right now, but the quality of life that you get here for how much you pay, it still goes a very, very long way, like a very long way. And just there's a good international community here as well. And I keep, this time around in Warsaw, I've been here for about 9 years, and I've gone through so many pockets of like international communities, and they're all over the place here, which I really enjoy. And no, in Poland, the culture has changed somewhat. I think money got into the system. People are a little less friendly, but it's still Poland. Get a bottle of vodka, go drink together, and everything will be okay. It's like
cool. Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things that we really have to understand. That if you also want to really change, you have to live in the right place.
Yeah.
Because the moment that the infrastructure is not available for you, everything around you is somehow is not going to happen just because of that.
Yeah.
And even let's just say right now in this whole innovation campus and everything that we're happening, sometimes all you need is just to find as you mentioned, like-minded people, give them an ecosystem that they can see each other, interact with each other, exchange their ideas. And then you don't even need to do anything.
Yeah.
Maybe even somehow like we're not growing potatoes in that thing.
No.
We're growing ideas.
Yeah. No, it's like communities are super powerful, super like, and I had this from firsthand experience, right? So going to a couple international schools, then I went to St. Andrews in Scotland, also just an international university, and then my steak business. And with the steak business, like I said, I do dinners and barbecues, and you gain experience from that. So when I used to do it, I would just invite whoever. Yeah, like the dinners are a great example, right? So you don't want to do anything larger than about 12 people. Ideally, 8 is ideal. Always even number between male and female, and only one wild card in the group. Yeah, because you want someone to continue the conversation. But if you get 2 wild cards, then the whole thing just falls apart. Yeah. So what I do now is it's great. Is I'll do like themed barbecues. So I'll do about 30 people, and I've done up to 80 before as well. I'm building a bigger smoker right now as well, so I can do feed 80 people at once. And I do themes. So I'll do like the film industry, or I'll do like the tech industry, or sometimes I'll mix the groups together, and then you get a weird amalgamation of these people like meeting. And then I have the dinners afterwards. So then I kind of hand select the people from those barbecues and then do the dinners and get this really high level conversation started. And then after that, I'm now setting up international sustainable communities, like one in Porto in Portugal, another in the south of Italy. And then I bring people down there, they buy houses and then start creating communities there. But like you said, the best thing, it's like every human created thing usually requires a ton of maintenance. It always breaks down. It's not like nature, which self-generates, right? It regenerates by itself. And what you find by building communities is that human touch together, that creates great things as well. So I've introduced people before, and a year down the road, they've done business together, they're good friends, and you just increase those bonds between the community, essentially. It's very powerful stuff.
Cool. Yeah. So Adam, thank you very much. That was really inspiring.
Appreciate you having me.
And at the same time, I really hope that we will get in touch with you and with nature.
Yeah.
And hopefully we manage to, somehow hit refresh and try to see if we can have a better start, like a more happy life, and not to try too hard to be happy. Right?
Yeah. It's not that difficult. Yeah. Just, but I'm more than happy to show people what I've discovered in my life. And nature really is a wonderful thing. Once you understand it and learn how to work with it, it really opens your eyes to what can be done. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Perfect.